Welcome to Sideline Theory. My name is Brandon Cheatham, and tonight we get an exclusive episode with just myself on it. Couldn't convince Mike to come back from vacation and cut that short to be here. So it's going to be a one-man show tonight, which should help us from the time standpoint and the fact that my opinions are going to be right tonight. No one to call me out, no one to have counterpoints. So we'll see. I think I could really like this. Won't be the format other than this week, but we'll try to get you guys through it with some takes and questions that we still pose to each other, but I'll give you my explanation of the answers from me personally. As some of you know, you can find us on Spotify like we've always been, but we also are on YouTube now. So I want you to go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, and turn on those notification bells so you can know exactly when we have an episode dropping. As always, I'm here to provide some semi-professional opinions from unprofessional distances, and just want to jump right into it tonight. So the first section we have here, Green Jacket reactions coming off of the Masters tournament. Some say there's nothing like a Sunday at the Masters. Being a Georgia native, Augusta, just a regular old place for us, but obviously a majestic place in the world of golf. So just pose the question here: what is your most favorite memory of the Masters? I myself, not a huge golf guy, but do recall a specific moment that was very memorable to me in 2012, which was the sudden death playoff victory for Bubba Watson after he hit into the pine straw and then had to hook a crazy shot to get back on the green. One of my favorite moments, one of the most memorable moments from the sheer fact of not a huge golf guy, but definitely watched that entire round practically that Sunday, and was pretty cool to see a shot that felt like maybe didn't have a shot to get up on the green and ultimately prove efficient to get a championship for Bubba Watson, UGA alum, so showing out in his home state in Augusta down the road from Athens. I will say very impressive for Rory McIlroy as the very elite list of guys that he has now joined as far as multiple winners, but he's also joined a much smaller list of repeat winners and hasn't been done since Tiger in 2001, 2002. So very impressive feat for himself to defend the championship from last year, bring it into this year with another victory. Even though that last tap-in putt still make me nervous. Not a golfer, so every little bit, there's some room for error there. But very impressive for Rory, and we'll see if he can maybe do something unheard of and go three-peat next year. That's a quick segment on golf. Not going to get too into that. Trying to keep everyone awake here. The second segment that we've titled Legacy Minutes. We've reached a point in the season where every possession starts to mean a little more and every mistake sticks a little longer. The part of the season where stars define history. The question we posed here: which bona fide star in the NBA is most likely to have a first-round exit? I will say when we first posed this question, the outlook of one of these teams wasn't exactly what it is as of reporting, earlier today. But I do think from the simple fact that we posed this as most likely, we got to go with the Los Angeles Lakers here, including LeBron. He's the star who's got the most likely first-round exit. A lot of that is driven based on the latest reporting out of LA that Austin Reeves and Luka Doncic are going to be unavailable for the first round. Regardless, it has shifted the line to Houston. They're 5.5-point favorites. Even though they're the higher seed. I think LeBron has a couple games where he can put the team on his back and carry the organization to a victory a couple of times. It's just hard for me to get super on board with him being 42 years old, carrying the team through a series with KD and some young talent in Houston, that he'll be able to carry that load. I think it's maybe a valiant effort from himself like we've seen in the past in losing efforts, but I don't think there's enough to get it done there. And I think KD and the crew in Houston take the first round and answer the question here of the most likely first-round exit. I will say if the Lakers were at full strength, I was kind of leaning into the Minnesota and Edwards series of just bona fide stars that will probably make a first-round exit just based on the pedigree and the pieces that the Denver Nuggets have. But with this injury news around Luka and Austin Reeves, I think it's a pretty cut and dry answer on the most likely exit in the first round for a star, which would be LeBron James. All right. Yeah, well, this is nice. No one's disagreeing with me. No one's cracking jokes. No one's correcting me. This is awesome. Segment 3. So we're going into the NBA playoffs. We've got the last couple of games tomorrow night for the play-in to determine the final field of the NBA playoffs. The question here, right, and we've got this segment from play-in to problem. Which team that is fighting for their chance to be into the playoff field, which team is the league going to regret letting in, right? And we've got the full, at this point when we posed the question, had the full field of the Suns, Blazers, Clippers, Warriors, Sixers, Magic, Hornets, Heat. At this point, we already know that the Blazers are in. We already know that the Sixers are in. And then tomorrow night's games will give us either the Suns or the Warriors, or will give us Charlotte or Orlando. I will say, in answering this question, I'm going to go ahead and make a conclusion based on the outcomes that I believe will happen tomorrow night. Seeing as how there's still those 2 spots available, like I said, that's going to be determined. I could be wrong on the games tomorrow night, which would throw this take way off. But I do think that the team that is the most dangerous, because of all the right components, because of the pedigree, because of the star power, and this feels like a layup, it's the Golden State Warriors. Steph Curry, Draymond Green, a few key pieces around them, I think can be very dangerous in spurts. I know they haven't carried a ton of momentum into the playoffs. They haven't strung together any wins recently in the far end of this regular season. But I do think the outcome against the Clippers the other night shows you a prime example of what they can still do. And you can make it interesting in a series, right? I do think it's probably pretty. The hopes are pretty minimal based on the first round matchup that you're gonna get. It would be very intriguing if there were any possibility that Jimmy Butler were going to be available. Clearly, he's not. I think that would, certainly throw them in a mix that would get very intriguing. Because we lack that, I think they're going to be outmatched, but I do think they're the most dangerous just based on the pedigree, based on the fact that Steph can go for 50 any night, and Draymond Green has the ability to really lock down your go-to guy on the offensive end, regardless of if he's scoring a ton, rebounding at all. The other night is direct evidence that he still has the ability to clamp people up, as evidenced by Kawhi being held to 2 points in the fourth quarter in a very tight game for your playoff life, and he just couldn't seem to get anything going. And Draymond's just quick enough to stay in front, just physical enough to put a body on you and wear you down. And I think because of that, mixed in with some of the pieces, I know Porzingis is iffy with health typically and currently, but that's a very intriguing piece on a team like this, of a guy that can come score in volumes, and Al Horford hitting some very timely shots like he has since I can remember, even back with the Hawks way back when. But he's a champion. Hit, I think it was 4 very timely threes in a spurt in the fourth quarter to keep them right there chipping away. And then if you stick around long enough, Steph's going to hit a shot to blow the top off. And that's exactly what happened at the end of that game. You go from they're chipping away, they're down 2 or 3 to they're up 6, and the game's over. So I think that is by far the most dangerous team that you can let in, based on Steph and Draymond alone and what they can do. You sprinkle in some high-end play from Al Horford or Porzingis if he can get back healthy. I think this is a dangerous team in what they can present to opponents. The next segment here is we're calling it the slide, how breaking stories reshape draft boards overnight. Sometimes it's not the tape, sometimes it's not the measurables, sometimes it's a rumor, sometimes it's a bona fide article, sometimes it's just the sheer timing of that news breaking. As most of you know, Ruben Bain Jr. out of Miami, near and dear to our hearts, myself and Mike being fans of that team, reporting that I was unaware of. I think most of the general public was unaware of. It's coming out that maybe the NFL GMs and ownership groups were aware of this. It sounded like Ruben and his agent maybe were pretty forthcoming with this, which would be a very smart tactic, knowing that this could drop at any minute. But Ruben Bain was involved, based on reporting, involved in a fatal car crash in 2024. He was initially cited with careless driving. That was ultimately dismissed, and it was dismissed a couple of weeks before the death of one of the passengers in that vehicle, Destiny Betts, a 22-year-old Georgia woman, after she spent 3 months in a coma before succumbing to her injuries from that crash. A huge story, loss of life. Rest in peace to Destiny Betts. Obviously, my thoughts and prayers to her family dealing with the loss of someone, especially at such a young age. This is a huge deal. I think this is a major story. I know this is a couple years back at this point, but there are some teams that are probably Ruben's off the board at this point. Even if he was forthcoming, there are teams that will not draft you. I'm not sure it creates a slide like in years past, and I've just cited some examples here. Laramie Tunzel had a video drop on his social media like moments before the draft started. He was a guy who at certain points in the process was like he's going to be the first number 1 overall pick of the entire draft. He ended up sliding to 13 where he was selected by the Miami Dolphins. He did a good job of owning it in the moment. So the timing of that was a little bit different than this one that, Baines came out practically 10 days before the draft, has given the organization some time to process and figure out if this is a deal breaker, if they're still going to consider him, if it moves them down their board and things like that. And then another one that I've cited was Lyle Collins, an LSU offensive lineman who was a projected first-round pick. Very likely he was going to go in the first round. There was some involvement by him in an investigation, albeit this was a murder investigation. He was not named a person of interest or a suspect. However, based on just the involvement of the investigation itself, he went from a projected first-round talent to undrafted. They are drawing more comparable similarities to the story out of Georgia with Jalen Carter and how the timing of that was a couple weeks before the draft. Similar in the stance that there was a loss of life. It was a driving incident that was involved. But projections from that draft had Jalen Carter going top 5, potentially top 3. He drops all the way to, I believe it was 9 to Philadelphia before they took a shot at taking him. And I will say, that hasn't culminated super perfectly for them, as there's reports now that do you extend or pay a guy that still has some perceived character issues, even in the NFL at this point, regardless of the talent that he also brings to the table. So the question here is, do we think this really affects his draft status, Ruben Bain? I think he's done himself a great service to go ahead and be forthcoming with most ownership and GM groups. And there was, from what I read, there was basically multiple teams consider that this matter has been handled, but there were a team or two not satisfied with the explanation that they received about the situation. So depending on who that is, that could affect some of the draft status, some of the placement of where his name will be called on draft night, whether that's, now going to be a top 5, 10, 15. We'll see what happens. But we're also adding this on top of the fact that there are already concerns about arm length. Not a concern of mine, obviously, and I'm also not going to be fired or promoted based on drafting him. But there are some other concerns that now this is just amplifying and could potentially cause a slide. Only time will tell once this draft is concluded and we see exactly where Ruben Bain is taken. So we'll see. I think it's a very interesting thing. There's a lot of speculation on how and why a story like this drops. That is intriguing to me as well. If this was something reported on, the reports are that the family of the woman who lost her life did not want this released. They did not want any public attention on this. So there's even some speculation in between why that would be the case. On if this was truly just someone breaking a story that they came across. Was this a team that wanted Ruben Bain to slide back so they could take him a little bit later in the draft? So yeah, a lot of speculative pieces of this, but ultimately just very curious to see what happens with draft status and if it really affects the overall positioning of where he's selected. So we'll see. Last segment here. Well, got a segment and then a quick shout out. Last segment, I thought I'd have a little fun with this one on something that's completely a sideline theory because I have no idea about the ins and outs of this question. But the segment we have is called Dream Coach or Nightmare Boss NBA Edition. Every NBA player has had one coach they'd run through a wall for and at least one that they'd probably rather avoid. Today, we're breaking down which bench bosses feel like a dream and which might be a straight-up nightmare. So, I'm going to give you my top and my bottom selection in the league for the NBA of guys that I think I would most like to play for and least like to play for. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this one because I don't know the ins and outs of these coaches. But I'll just go ahead and start with Joe Mazzulla, the Boston Celtics. He would be my top choice. He seems to treat all his guys the same from an accountability standpoint. He seems to really stress the effort and the mentality side of the game, which is great for a team like Boston, who has all the upside talent in the world. So to have that team hone in on effort and rebounding is only an upside. I'm really loving his press conferences lately. He's very funny. He's dry funny, which is kind of my sense of humor. I really like that. A lot of the guys, too, on the team have called out that he will fit his coaching to your personality. And I don't think enough guys do that in this realm. Even some of the guys that we would all consider NFL, NBA greats don't necessarily do that. I do think that is the new age. I think you've got to learn to adapt to your players, get the messaging across however you can do that. And it's not so much that you need to change yourself, just the approach for certain guys to help things land a little bit more conducively to them fixing things and becoming a better component of success and winning. So I think Joe Mazzulla takes the top selection for myself. If my 5'9" frame would ever end up in the NBA, that'd be a guy that I want to play for. And I kind of like that he's super casual about, this is a game. Like, let's not put as much stake as some people do. This is not life or death. This is your occupation. Let's have a blast and see what we can do and make a run. Now, I will say, I know that's easier when you're better than a lot of teams in the NBA. It's easier to have that outlook. But I do like the fact that it doesn't seem like a super stressed, a super anxiety-ridden locker room like some other scenarios in the NBA, which we'll get over to my next selection here, the bottom choice, the guy that I would least like to play for here. And I'm going to take a layup, to use my basketball terms. Chauncey Billups. That's the one guy I don't want to play for. To be honest, it was hard to select someone here, so I just took the guy that's indefinitely dismissed. I just put, hey, I don't want to get involved in the mob, and I don't want to be on the wrong end of that. And I don't want to be involved in games that my coach is purposely throwing the game for us. So I selected Chauncey Billups. Although, very interesting storyline to see how Portland does in these playoffs, considering that's how their year started with the coach being taken off the bench. And I think there are whispers about Dame. I don't know how far he is from a return, but that would be crazy if they could somehow patch together a deep run and make something spectacular happen. We'll see. I don't think that's going to be the case, but very intriguing that you started where you started with your coaching situation and are now going to at least be able to participate in a first round series in the NBA playoffs. So that's it. Dream coach Missoula, nightmare boss Chauncey Billups. I'm sure there are others that I'm not truly accounting for here, but like I said, that's an authentic sideline theory because we got no idea what these guys are actually like with their teams. And lastly, we'll keep it short and sweet. Yeah, which I guess makes sense, right? We don't have Mike rebuttaling everything that I'm saying, so it should be about half the length for the episode. The last thing that I want to mention, as you guys can see here, I know it feels weird. It's in the conference. The Miami guy wearing the Tech gear. My father-in-law, brother-in-law are Tech alums, two of the best men that I've ever met in my life. They're incredible, and they have to endure football season. So the fact that the baseball team has taken off, kudos to that team for giving my in-law something to really support. My wife, super invested. I have never walked into a house after work on a Tuesday afternoon and college baseball is on the screen. That's not the house we live in. Well, it used to be. It used to not be the house we live in. But my wife is super invested. She's naming all the stats. She's who's the best hitter, who's the best pitcher, who's the closer. It's incredible. So she's in a world of her own. Her and her dad are speaking about this. So I have to give a quick shout out to the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets baseball team. They are currently number 2 in the country with a record of 31-5. And I believe it's their best start since 1994. So when I was born. I will say they've got a big series starting tomorrow night in Chapel Hill against North Carolina, who's number 3 in the country. So we'll see some true tests here, but they did fare pretty well against number 5 in the country, Florida State, several days ago. So I think, we'll see how tested they are once they get through this North Carolina series. It's like I said, starting tomorrow night, but I also think they're on a 13-game win streak. I don't know. I have to check with my wife. She's really in tune with this right now. But figured I'd represent the gear, give a shout out. It's warranted. They're playing well. And then they currently have the second best odds to win the 2026 College Baseball World Series. And, I imagine depending on how deep the run goes, if that is true, if they're making a run, I think they've even had some early discussions about my wife and my father-in-law about trying to hitch a ride to Omaha or something and see if they can go catch a game. So we'll see. I don't know. We'll see what they can do. But yeah, shout out Georgia Tech Yellow Jacket baseball. And last quick story on that. My brother-in-law, who owns his own company doing locker room flooring and lockers and probably some other stuff that I'm not accounting for. But the first and only job that I ever helped him on was installing the lockers in the Georgia Tech baseball locker room. And I think day 2, I ran a drill through his hand, and that was the last time he ever asked me to help with anything related to power tools in my hand near him. So, yeah, I mean, clearly just attributing their success to that locker room install from, 7 years ago. Probably longer at this point. But that's my 2 cents on Georgia Tech baseball. I hope they win every game for the rest of the year, make my household very happy, and I'm with that, not following Miami baseball, so it's not even really a downside for me there. As long as football reigns supreme, I'm good. But I appreciate you guys joining this week, catching this episode. Next week, we should be back with Mike from vacation, so you won't just get bogged down with my opinions. You'll get to hear all of his outlandish takes, and I'm sure he'll squeeze the fact that he believes Wemby's the best in the league into at least 2 or 3 segments next week so he can make up for the week he lost. But you guys have a great rest of your week. Thanks for tuning in.